Hidden beneath the surface of history, woven into the shadows of medieval Europe, lies a secret so profound it has tantalized scholars and seekers for centuries. Imagine a brotherhood so enigmatic that their very existence was announced not by whispers in dark alleyways, but by three mysterious manifestos, appearing suddenly in the early 17th century, texts filled with cryptic symbols, alchemical riddles, and promises of ancient wisdom. This was the Rosicrucians, a name that still echoes through time, sparking debates, inspiring movements, and leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. Who were they? What knowledge did they guard? And why, after all these years, does their legacy continue to captivate those who dare to look deeper? If you've ever felt drawn to the mysteries that lurk just beyond the edges of conventional history, you're not alone. The Rosicrucians weren't just another secret society. They were a phenomenon, a spark that ignited revolutions in thought, science, and spirituality. Their influence rippled through the Renaissance, touched the minds of great thinkers like Isaac Newton and Goethe, and even shaped the foundations of modern esoteric traditions. Yet, despite their impact, they remain shrouded in myth, their origins debated, their true purpose a puzzle waiting to be solved. What if I told you that their story isn't just a relic of the past, but a key to understanding hidden currents of history that still flow beneath our world today? This is where our journey begins. We're about to step into a realm where philosophy meets mysticism, where science and the sacred intertwine, and where the line between legend and reality blurs. The Rosicrucians didn't just leave behind cryptic texts, they left a challenge, an invitation to those willing to seek deeper truths. Over the course of this exploration, we'll unravel their manifestos, decode their symbols, and trace their influence through the centuries. By the end, you won't just know about the Rosicrucians, you'll feel the weight of their mystery, the thrill of their secrets, and the lingering question: what if their greatest revelation is still waiting to be uncovered? Strap in, because history is about to get a lot more fascinating. The story of the Rosicrucians begins not with a person, but with a puzzle, three enigmatic documents that surfaced in early 17th century Europe, shaking the intellectual world to its core. The first, known as the Fama Fraternitatis, appeared in 1614, written in German and addressed to the learned of Europe. It told the tale of a secret brotherhood founded by a man named Christian Rosenkreuz, a figure as elusive as the morning mist. According to the text, Rosenkreuz had traveled to the East, studying under masters of arcane wisdom before returning to Europe to establish an invisible order dedicated to the reformation of science, religion, and society itself. But here's what's fascinating: this wasn't just a recruitment pamphlet. It was a provocation, a challenge thrown at the feet of Europe's brightest minds. The Fama didn't just describe a hidden fraternity, it dared its readers to seek them out, insisting that only the worthy would ever find them. Then came the Confessio Fraternitatis, a follow-up manifesto published a year later, this time in Latin, the language of scholars and clerics. Where the Fama teased with fragments of a story, the Confessio deepened the mystery, weaving together alchemy, prophecy, and a vision of a coming spiritual awakening. It spoke of ancient secrets guarded by the Brotherhood, secrets that could transform the world. But the text was deliberately cryptic, filled with symbols and riddles that seemed to hint at something far grander than a mere secret society. And at the center of it all stood Rosenkreuz, a man who supposedly lived for over a century, whose tomb, discovered by his followers years after his death, was said to glow with an otherworldly light. But here's the twist: there's no concrete evidence that Christian Rosenkreuz ever existed. Some historians argue he was pure allegory, a symbolic stand-in for the ideals of the Rosicrucian movement. Others suggest he might have been a composite of real esoteric figures, his legend cobbled together from fragments of older traditions. What's undeniable is the impact these texts had. They weren't just read, they were dissected, debated, and in some cases even denounced as dangerous heresy. The Catholic Church condemned them, philosophers like Descartes and Leibniz reportedly wrestled with their meanings. And across Europe, secret circles began claiming they were the true heirs of the Rosicrucian legacy, each adding their own layers to the myth. What makes these manifestos so enduring isn't just their content, but the way they blur the line between reality and allegory. They function like a mirror, reflecting the hopes and fears of their time, a Europe torn apart by religious wars, hungry for new knowledge, yet terrified of the changes that knowledge might bring. The Rosicrucians promised a middle path, a synthesis of science and spirituality that could heal a fractured world. But they also demanded something in return, a willingness to question, to seek, to look beyond the surface of things. And that, perhaps, is why their mystery still lingers, because the real question isn't whether Rosenkreuz was real, it's why his story, and the ideals it represents, continue to echo through the centuries, calling to those who still believe that hidden truths await discovery. But what exactly did these mysterious manifestos say, and why did they ignite such fervor? Let's peel back the layers of the Forma Fraternitatis first. At its core, it reads like an allegorical adventure Christian Rosenkreuz's journey to Damascus, Jerusalem, and even the mythical city of Damkar, where he supposedly studied under sages versed in alchemy, Kabbalah, and ancient Hermetic wisdom. Yet woven into this tale are startlingly modern ideas, a call for free access to knowledge, a rejection of dogmatic authority, and a vision of science and spirituality united rather than at odds. The text doesn't just describe a secret brotherhood, it accuses the institutions of its time of hoarding truth, insisting that real enlightenment should be available to all who earnestly seek it. Then there's the Confessio Fraternitatis, which takes the mystery even deeper. Written in dense, poetic language, it's littered with alchemical imagery, references to the philosopher's stone, celestial alignments, and a great reformation foretold by the stars. But read between the lines and you'll find something radical for its era, a plea for intellectual freedom. The Confessio warns against blind faith in both religious doctrine and emerging scientific materialism, proposing instead a middle path where observation and revelation walk hand in hand. It's no accident that the text repeatedly mentions signs and wonders, not as miracles to be worshipped, but as clues to be deciphered by those with eyes to see. The third manifesto, the chimical wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz, is perhaps the most enigmatic of all. Published in 1616, it abandons the declarative tone of the first two texts, unfolding instead as a surreal allegory. Rosenkreuz is invited to a royal wedding, a symbolic fusion of opposites, where kings and queens represent celestial bodies, and every guest undergoes bizarre trials testing their purity and wisdom. Here, the Rosicrucian message shifts from manifesto to initiation ritual, demanding not just intellectual curiosity but personal transformation. Fail the tests and your literal baggage thrown over a castle wall. Pass them and you're granted glimpses of a luminous, almost divine science hidden from the masses. What ties these texts together isn't just their symbolism, it's their deliberate ambiguity. Every riddle serves a dual purpose, to conceal knowledge from the unready while revealing it to those who have done the inner work. Take the repeated references to invisibility. The Brotherhood claims to operate unseen, not as a boast but as a metaphor for how true understanding can't be handed over. It must be earned through relentless questioning. Even the manifesto's timing is telling. They appeared as Europe stood at a crossroads. The Inquisition's shadow loomed, while Galileo's telescope shattered old cosmologies. In that climate, the Rosicrucians didn't just offer answers. They handed their readers a mirror and a challenge. Who are you in this age of upheaval? A passive observer or one willing to brave the unknown? The genius of these documents lies in what they don't say as much as what they do. By leaving gaps in the narrative, never specifying Rosenkreuz's exact teachings or the Brotherhood's whereabouts, they turned readers into active participants. To engage with the texts was to join a kind of metaphysical scavenger hunt, where the prize wasn't just hidden knowledge but the transformation that came from seeking it. And that may be the most potent secret of all, the idea that wisdom isn't a static thing to be possessed, but a living process sparked by curiosity, tested by doubt, and proven only by the change it works in the seeker. The concept of an invisible college lies at the heart of the Rosicrucian enigma, a hidden network of enlightened individuals working in secret to steer humanity towards spiritual and intellectual awakening. This idea wasn't just a romantic flourish, it was a radical reimagining of how knowledge could operate in the world. Unlike the universities and monasteries of the time, which were bound by dogma and hierarchy, the Rosicrucians proposed something far more fluid, a brotherhood without borders, its members unrecognized by the public yet united by a shared pursuit of wisdom. They called it the College of the Holy Spirit, a place that existed not in stone and mortar, but in the collective consciousness of its initiates. And here's where things get intriguing. This notion didn't vanish with the 17th century. Instead, it became a blueprint, inspiring generations of thinkers, revolutionaries, and even scientists who saw themselves as part of an unbroken chain of seekers. Consider the Royal Society of London, founded in 1660. Many of its early members, including Robert Boyle and Elias Ashmole, were deeply influenced by Rosicrucian ideas. Though the society championed empirical science, its founders often spoke of knowledge as a sacred trust, echoing the Rosicrucian vision of enlightened minds working in harmony. Even Isaac Newton, whose laws of motion reshaped physics, spent years studying alchemical texts linked to the Brotherhood's traditions. Was this mere coincidence or proof that the invisible college had subtly infiltrated the halls of mainstream science? The lines blur when you realize how many pioneers of the Enlightenment operated in dual roles: public scientists by day, private seekers of esoteric truths by night. But the Rosicrucian influence didn't stop there. Fast forward to the 18th century and you'll find Freemasonry absorbing elements of their mystique. Masonic lodges adopted symbols like the rose and cross, framing their own rituals around the idea of gradual enlightenment for the worthy. Then came the Illuminati, a short-lived but infamous order that imagined itself as a modern incarnation of the invisible brotherhood, manipulating history from the shadows. While these groups differed in their goals, they all shared one Rosicrucian hallmark: the belief that true progress required secrecy, a shielded space where ideas could mature beyond the reach of censorship or ridicule. What makes the invisible college so enduring is its psychological power. It taps into a universal longing, the sense that somewhere, somehow, there are wiser minds working toward a brighter future, even when chaos seems to rule the day. This isn't just conspiracy thinking, it's a narrative of hope. The Rosicrucians didn't promise utopia delivered from on high. Instead, they suggested that enlightenment was a collaborative project, advanced by countless unnamed individuals, each doing their part in the shadows. Today, you can hear echoes of this idea in everything from speculative fiction about secret mentors to modern theories about collective consciousness. The genius of the invisible college lies in its ambiguity. By never defining its membership or methods, the Rosicrucians made it adaptable, a mirror for every era's aspirations. For some, it's a call to intellectual rebellion. For others, a metaphor for the quiet work of artists, scientists, and healers who shape the world without fanfare. And perhaps that's the real lesson. The most transformative forces in history often operate unseen, not because they're hiding, but because true change begins in the spaces between what's officially acknowledged. The Rosicrucians didn't just found a secret society, they planted an idea that the pursuit of wisdom is itself a kind of initiation, and that every seeker, in their own way, becomes part of the invisible college. Alchemy wasn't just a hobby for the Rosicrucians, it was the very language of their mystery. At first glance, their references to the philosopher's stone or turning lead into gold might sound like the stuff of medieval fairy tales. But peel back the symbolism and you uncover a far more profound quest. For them, alchemy was never solely about transforming metals. It was a mirror of the human soul, a guidebook for inner metamorphosis where base desires could be refined into spiritual gold. The crucibles and alembics described in their texts weren't just tools of a laboratory. They were metaphors for the crucible of self-discipline, patience, and revelation that every seeker had to endure. Take the philosopher's stone, that legendary substance said to grant immortality and limitless wealth. The Rosicrucians spoke of it not as a physical object, but as a state of enlightenment, the moment when the seeker finally unraveled the deepest truths of existence. Their alchemical recipes, filled with cryptic instructions about dissolving and coagulating matter, were really coded lessons in breaking down illusion and reconstructing perception. When they wrote of the sun and moon merging in the flask, they pointed to the union of opposites within the self, logic and intuition, masculine and feminine, the conscious and subconscious mind. Even their insistence on secrecy makes sense in this light. Just as base metals needed isolation from corrupting influences to transform, so too did the seeker require solitude to refine their inner world. Yet to dismiss their alchemy as purely symbolic would be a mistake. The Rosicrucians existed at a crossroads in history when science and mysticism hadn't yet divorced. Figures like Paracelsus, a major influence on their thought, used alchemy to pioneer early medicine, discovering remedies through trial and error in their quest for the universal solvent. The Brotherhood's texts often blur the line between chemical experiment and spiritual exercise. A recipe might begin with tangible ingredients like mercury or sulfur, only to conclude with instructions for meditation under specific planetary alignments. This wasn't confusion, it was a deliberate fusion, suggesting that matter and spirit were two sides of the same coin. Their most radical idea that the universe itself was an alchemical process. The Rosicrucian Manifestos describe creation as an ongoing transmutation, with every star, stone, and human soul participating in a grand work of purification. In an age when the Church taught that divinity was separate from nature, this was heresy of the highest order, but it also offered liberation. If the world was a living laboratory, then every person could become an alchemist not of metals but of their own destiny. Suffering became the blackening stage where old identities dissolved. Study and contemplation were the whitening where clarity emerged and wisdom. That was the coveted reddening, the final stage where the seeker became both student and master. This alchemical worldview left fingerprints everywhere. You can spot it in Carl Jung's theories of individuation centuries later, where he described personal growth using eerily similar imagery of dissolution and rebirth. It's there in modern psychology's understanding of trauma and transformation how pressure and time can turn pain into wisdom. Even the language of self-help owes a debt to these ideas, with their promise that disciplined effort can remake the self. The Rosicrucians didn't just practice alchemy, they embedded its principles into the DNA of Western thought, offering a map for anyone daring enough to believe that leaden limitations could, with the right knowledge and perseverance, become golden potential. The rose and cross, perhaps the most iconic of all Rosicrucian symbols, holds secrets within its deceptively simple design. At first glance, it appears as nothing more than a single rose blooming at the center of a cross, but this image carries layers of esoteric meaning. The cross itself represents the material world, the physical plane of existence with its four directions and earthly struggles. The rose, with its delicate petals unfurling, symbolizes the soul's journey toward enlightenment, blossoming even amidst hardship. Together, they embody the Rosicrucian ideal, the marriage of spirit and matter, the divine flowering within the human experience. Some interpretations go deeper, suggesting the thorns of the rose signify the sacrifices required for true wisdom, while its perfume represents the subtle, intoxicating nature of higher knowledge. Then there's the pelican, a lesser-known but equally potent symbol in Rosicrucian iconography, often depicted piercing its own breast to feed its young with its blood. This image speaks to the alchemical principle of sacrifice and regeneration. In medieval bestiaries, the pelican was believed to revive its dead chicks with its own lifeblood, making it a perfect metaphor for the initiate's journey, destroying the old self to nourish the new. For the Rosicrucians, this wasn't just a Christian allegory of Christ's sacrifice. It hinted at something more intimate, the idea that true wisdom demands personal transformation, a willingness to give up comfort for the sake of deeper understanding. The all-seeing eye, another cornerstone of their symbolism, has sparked fascination and controversy for centuries. Unlike the modern interpretation linked to conspiracy theories, the Rosicrucian eye floats within a triangle, radiating beams of light. This represents the divine spark within the human mind, the ability to perceive hidden truths beyond the veil of appearances. The triangle often signifies the trinity of body, mind, and spirit, while the eye itself suggests an awakened state of consciousness. It's not about surveillance, but about illumination, the moment when the seeker finally sees the interconnectedness of all things. Other symbols weave through Rosicrucian texts with equal potency. The serpent swallowing its tail, the Ouroboros, appears frequently as a symbol of eternity and cyclical renewal. The phoenix, rising from ashes, mirrors the alchemical process of death and rebirth central to their teachings. Even something as simple as a ladder could hold profound meaning, representing the step-by-step ascent toward spiritual mastery. What unites these symbols is their dual nature. Each operates on both a practical and metaphysical level, speaking to the material and the mystical simultaneously. Decoding these emblems reveals a consistent theme of transformation. Whether it's the rose pushing through wood, the pelican's self-inflicted wound, or the all-seeing eye-piercing illusion, each symbol maps a path from ignorance to enlightenment. They weren't meant to be merely admired, but engaged with a visual language that demanded active interpretation. To the Rosicrucians, a symbol was never just an image. It was a doorway, a puzzle, and a mirror all at once, reflecting back whatever level of understanding the viewer brought to it. And that may be their most enduring lesson. True symbols don't just convey meaning, they awaken it. The Rosicrucian Enlightenment might sound like a paradox. How could a secret mystical order influence an age celebrated for reason and science? Yet scratch the surface of history, and you'll find their fingerprints all over the intellectual revolution that reshaped Europe. Take Francis Bacon, often called the father of empiricism. His vision of a scientific utopia in New Atlantis reads like a Rosicrucian manifesto in disguise, an island where sages in scarlet robes conduct experiments to benefit humanity, guarding knowledge until the world is ready. Bacon never openly claimed ties to the brotherhood, but his writings drip with their themes: the moral duty of science, the importance of secret research, and the belief that true knowledge could usher in a golden age. His famous phrase, "knowledge is power," takes on new meaning when you realize the Rosicrucians saw wisdom not as a commodity, but as a sacred force to be wielded with care. Then there's Robert Fludd, the English physician who became their most vocal defender. While Galileo peered through telescopes, Fludd mapped the universe as a living organism, blending anatomy, astrology, and alchemy into a grand cosmic theory. To modern eyes, his work seems eccentric, but his insistence that the material and spiritual worlds were inseparable mirrored the Rosicrucian credo. When mainstream academics mocked him, Fludd fired back with a startling claim that the Brotherhood's invisible college already held the keys to unifying science and faith, and that the Enlightenment's rigid materialism was a dead end. His battles with Kepler over the nature of light weren't just scientific disputes. They were skirmishes in a war between two visions of knowledge, one purely mathematical, the other infused with divine purpose. What's often overlooked is how these ideas seeped into institutions we now consider pillars of rationality. The Royal Society, birthplace of modern science, was founded by men steeped in Hermeticism and alchemy. John D's Protay, Gay's and Bacon's disciples. Early meetings debated everything from gravity to angelic hierarchies, with Isaac Newton himself scribbling more about alchemical recipes than calculus in his private notebooks. This wasn't hypocrisy. It was a reflection of the Rosicrucian ideal that true understanding required multiple lenses: experiment and revelation, data and dream. The irony is delicious. While the Enlightenment later mythologized itself as reason-slaying superstition, its pioneers operated in a twilight world where microscopes and mystic symbols sat side by side. The scientific method emerged not in opposition to hidden wisdom, but as its disciplined offspring, a way to test which ancient secrets held weight under scrutiny. Even the Brotherhood's love of codes and ciphers found new life in early cryptography, with thinkers like Leibniz borrowing their symbolic logic for binary mathematics. Perhaps the Rosicrucians' greatest gift was their refusal to choose between the laboratory and the temple. By insisting that the universe was both measurable and magical, they kept alive a question we're still grappling with: can we truly understand existence if we only count what can be counted? Their legacy isn't just in dusty manuscripts, but in the unspoken tension at the heart of modern science, the haunting sense that for all our equations, something luminous still flickers just beyond the edge of the data. The relationship between the Rosicrucians and Freemasonry is less a straight line than a tangled web of shared symbols, borrowed rituals, and heated historical debate. To understand how these two enigmatic traditions intertwine, we have to step into the early 18th century, when Freemasonry as we know it began taking shape. Masonic lodges started incorporating elements that felt strikingly familiar to anyone who'd read the Rosicrucian manifestos, the rose and cross appearing in degrees like the Knights of the Rosenkreuz, the emphasis on gradual initiation through symbolic trials, even the notion of a hidden wisdom passed down through generations. But was this imitation, overlap, or something deeper? Some historians argue that Freemasonry became a vessel for Rosicrucian ideas when the Brotherhood itself seemed to vanish. After the frenzy of the manifestos died down, the Rosicrucians faded from public view, if they'd ever existed as an organized group at all. Meanwhile, Masonic lodges offered a ready-made structure, secretive but accessible, hierarchical yet open to seekers. The shift wasn't just cosmetic. Early Masonic texts like the 18th century, three distinct knocks, directly referenced the Rosy Cross, suggesting some lodges saw themselves as inheritors of the tradition. Even the Masonic obsession with architectural symbolism, the pillars, the compass, the unfinished temple, echoes the Rosicrucian vision of rebuilding civilization through esoteric knowledge. Yet the connection isn't purely historical, it's philosophical. Both traditions share a core belief in transformation through symbolism. Where Rosicrucians used alchemy as a metaphor for inner change, Freemasons employed the stonemason's tools. The chisel became a symbol of refining character, the square represented moral balance, and the lodge itself stood as a microcosm of the perfected world. Even their initiations mirror each other. Rosicrucian texts describe ordeals of darkness and light, while Masonic rituals plunge candidates into symbolic darkness before revealing the light. These parallels aren't accidental. They suggest a shared ancestry in much older mystery schools, perhaps stretching back to medieval guilds or even further. But here's where the debate ignites. Some scholars insist Freemasonry simply absorbed Rosicrucian themes during the Enlightenment, repackaging mystical ideas for a more rational age. Others point to coded references in Masonic archives hinting at direct transmission whispers of unknown superiors guiding the lodges from the shadows, a possible nod to Rosicrucian adepts. The truth may lie somewhere in between. What's undeniable is how profoundly Rosicrucianism shaped Masonry's self-image as guardians of a lost wisdom. Whether through conscious borrowing or unconscious resonance, the two became inseparable in the public imagination. The most compelling evidence of their kinship isn't in dusty manuscripts, but in the figures who bridged both worlds. Take Count Alessandro di Cagliostro, the infamous 18th-century mystic who claimed to possess Rosicrucian secrets while founding Egyptian Rite Freemasonry. Or Karl von Hund, creator of the strict observance rite, who insisted his Masonic authority came from invisible Rosicrucian masters. Even today, branches like the Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia operate as Masonic-affiliated orders, blending the traditions openly. The lines blur so completely that asking which came first becomes almost irrelevant, like trying to separate roots from branches on the same tree. What makes this intersection fascinating isn't just the historical puzzle, but what it reveals about how secret societies evolve. Ideas don't disappear, they adapt, finding new forms when old ones grow brittle. The Rosicrucian vision of an enlightened brotherhood didn't vanish, it put on Masonic aprons and kept working. And that may be the most poignant lesson of all, that the most enduring mysteries aren't those locked away in vaults, but those flexible enough to wear new disguises across the centuries. Not every secret society leaves behind a trail of hard evidence. Some leave only questions, whispers, and the lingering suspicion that perhaps none of it was real to begin with. That's the heart of the Rosicrucian hoax theory, a scholarly argument that's as provocative as the Manifestos themselves. What if Christian Rosenkreuz never existed? What if the entire brotherhood was nothing more than an elaborate literary prank, a thought experiment disguised as a mystery? The idea isn't as far-fetched as it might seem. The timing of the Manifestos, published in a Europe simmering with religious tension and intellectual upheaval, raises eyebrows. Could they have been a clever satire, a Trojan horse of radical ideas smuggled into public discourse under the guise of a secret order? The case for the hoax hinges on several curious details. First, there's the complete absence of verifiable historical records about Rosenkreuz or his followers outside the Manifestos themselves. No membership rolls, no physical traces of their supposed headquarters, not even a single confirmed sighting of a Rosicrucian in the wild. Then there's the writing style, dense, allegorical, dripping with irony. Scholars like Francis Yates point out that the Manifestos read less like sacred texts and more like Renaissance fan fiction, blending elements of chivalric romance, satire, and utopian fiction. Even the name Rosicrucian feels suspiciously on the nose, combining the rose, a symbol of secrecy, and the cross, a nod to Christian mysticism, into a brand so perfect it seems designed rather than discovered. But the most compelling evidence might lie in the Manifestos' aftermath, when readers across Europe took the bait, flooding publishers with letters begging to join the Brotherhood. No one ever received a reply. No secret meetings were arranged, no initiates welcomed. Instead, a wave of panic swept through ecclesiastical and academic circles, with authorities denouncing a society that never showed its face. This silence fuels the hoax theory. If the Rosicrucians were real, why didn't they capitalize on the frenzy they'd created? Unless, of course, the point wasn't to recruit, but to provoke, to expose the public's hunger for hidden knowledge by dangling a fiction they'd too eagerly believe. Yet dismissing the Rosicrucians as pure fabrication overlooks something crucial. Hoaxes can still change history. Whether or not the Brotherhood physically existed, their ideas undeniably shaped real-world movements. The Manifestos sparked actual alchemical research, inspired genuine secret societies, and even influenced the scientific revolution. This paradox raises a fascinating question. Does it matter if the Rosicrucians were real when their legacy is undeniable? The printing press didn't care about authorial intent. Once those texts entered circulation, they took on a life of their own, becoming more than their creators may have intended. The hoax theory also fails to explain the eerie consistency of Rosicrucian symbolism across unrelated groups that emerged later. How did Freemasons, 19th century occultists, and even modern psychological theorists all land on similar imagery if there wasn't some kernel of tradition beneath the myth? Skeptics argue this is just the Barnum effect, the tendency for vague statements to feel personally meaningful, but that doesn't account for the specific technical alchemical knowledge embedded in the texts. Someone clearly understood the deeper Hermetic principles they were riffing on. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere between hoax and history. The Manifestos might have begun as an intellectual game among Tübingen scholars. Johann Valentin André, a Lutheran theologian with a flair for satire, is often named as a possible architect, but games can have serious consequences. By packaging radical ideas about religious tolerance, scientific freedom, and spiritual renewal inside a gripping mystery, the authors ensured their message would outlast them. The Rosicrucians may have been fictional, but the hunger they exposed for a world where science and mysticism coexist, that was and still is profoundly real. In the end, the greatest trick the Rosicrucians ever pulled wasn't convincing the world they existed. It was making us wonder, centuries later, whether we'd be better off if they did. From the moment the Rosicrucian manifestos appeared, artists and writers seized upon their imagery like moths to a flame, not just as inspiration, but as collaborators in the great work of unraveling the Brotherhood's mysteries. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, better known for Faust, actually structured his lesser-known fairy tale The Green Snake and the Beautiful Lily around unmistakably Rosicrucian themes, a temple accessible only to the worthy, a river that parts for those with pure intentions, even a cryptic old man who might as well be Christian Rosenkreuz himself. But it's Goethe's earlier fascination with the chimical wedding, a text he reportedly studied deeply, that reveals the real kinship. Like the Rosicrucian original, his works pulse with the tension between earthly desire and spiritual ascent, between the seen and the unseen. His protagonists don't just seek knowledge, they undergo trials that strip them bare before granting revelation. Then there's Edward Bulwer Lytton's Zanoni, an 1842 novel that drops Rosicrucianism into the age of revolutions. The titular character is an immortal adept whose wisdom spans centuries, walking through history like a shadowy guardian. Bulwer Lytton didn't just borrow the trappings of the Brotherhood, he embedded their philosophy into the plot. Zanoni's greatest test comes when he must choose between his supernatural powers and human love, mirroring the Rosicrucian dilemma of how to wield esoteric knowledge without losing touch with mortal suffering. The book even includes a fictionalized version of Count Cagliostro, blurring the line between historical secret societies and literary invention. What makes Zanoni remarkable isn't its accuracy, but how it translates Rosicrucian ideals into the language of Gothic romance, proving their adaptability across genres. But the Brotherhood's influence wasn't confined to high literature. Alexander Dumas wove them into the Count of Monte Cristo, where the imprisoned Edmond Dantès receives an education straight out of a Rosicrucian manual, alchemy, languages, mathematics from the mysterious Abbé Faria. Even the Count's eventual mastery of disguise and revenge echoes the Manifestos' theme of invisible actors shaping history. Meanwhile, in the visual arts, alchemical engravings by the likes of Matthias Merian dripped with Rosicrucian symbolism, roses blooming from skulls, lions devouring suns, all rendered with meticulous detail that invited decoding. These weren't just illustrations, they were puzzles for the initiated, a silent dialogue between artist and adept. The surrealists of the 20th century, particularly André Breton and Salvador Dali, would later claim the Rosicrucians as proto-surrealists, praising their fusion of dream logic and rigorous symbolism. Dali's melting clocks and disjointed landscapes might seem worlds apart from 17th century manifestos, but both share a conviction that reality is far stranger than it appears, that beneath the surface of things lies a web of hidden connections. Even modern fantasy, from Umberto Eco's Foucault's Pendulum to the Harry Potter series' alchemical subtext, owes a debt to the Rosicrucian knack for wrapping profound ideas in layers of enigma. What unites these artistic interpretations is less about factual fidelity and more about the Brotherhood's enduring role as a mirror. Every era reimagines the Rosicrucians to reflect its own anxieties and aspirations, whether as Gothic antiheroes, Enlightenment reformers, or psychedelic visionaries. Their true power lies not in any historical reality, but in their infinite adaptability as symbols. They become whatever the artist needs them to be, guardians of lost wisdom, cautionary tales about forbidden knowledge, or simply beautiful mysteries waiting to be unraveled by anyone daring enough to look closer. Hidden within the vaults of rare book collections lie documents that have defied centuries of attempts at decipherment, the Rosicrucian cipher manuscripts. Among the most tantalizing is the so-called RC manuscript, a 17th century text filled with bizarre symbols, alchemical diagrams, and passages of seemingly nonsensical script. At first glance, it appears to be the work of a madman or an elaborate hoax, but scholars who have studied its intricate patterns insist there's method to the madness. The text follows a deliberate structure with repeating motifs and carefully arranged sections that suggest a hidden logic beneath the chaos. Some believe it holds the lost teachings of Christian Rosenkreuz himself, encoded to protect them from unworthy eyes. Others argue it's a test, a riddle designed to separate true initiates from mere curiosity seekers. What makes these cipher texts so frustrating and fascinating is their refusal to yield to conventional decoding methods. Unlike simple substitution ciphers where one letter stands for another, the RC manuscript employs layers of obfuscation, alchemical emblems that double as letters, numerical sequences referencing celestial alignments, even passages that shift between Latin, Greek, and invented alphabets. Modern cryptographers have thrown every tool at it, from frequency analysis to artificial intelligence, yet its core meaning remains elusive. The closest parallel might be the infamous Voynich manuscript, that 15th century book of cryptic illustrations and undeciphered text now housed at Yale. Both share an uncanny resistance to cracking, and both hint at a lost scientific or mystical tradition just beyond our grasp. The connection between these texts runs deeper than their indecipherability. Some researchers note startling overlaps in symbolism, strangely similar plant drawings in both manuscripts, recurring motifs of zodiacal wheels, even matching marginalia that suggests a shared esoteric vocabulary. A controversial theory posits that the Voynich manuscript might be an earlier, cruder attempt at the same knowledge system the Rosicrucians later refined. After all, the Rosicrucian Manifestos reference books given to Europe by the East, and the Voynich's origins trace roughly to the same period Christian Rosenkreuz supposedly traveled to Damascus and Jerusalem. Could these manuscripts be fragments of a grander puzzle scattered across time by design? Recent breakthroughs have added fuel to the mystery. In 2019, a team using semantic analysis algorithms identified possible word boundaries in the RC manuscript, hinting at passages discussing the union of sun and moon and the fire that does not burn. Meanwhile, marginal notes in a private Venetian archive suggest that famed alchemist Michael Mayer, a known Rosicrucian apologist, owned a cipher key that was lost when his library burned in 1630. The most tantalizing clue surfaced just last year, a previously unknown letter between two 18th century Freemasons referencing a Rosicrucian cipher wheel held in a Prague monastery. Whether any of these leads will crack the code remains uncertain, but they underscore a vital truth: these aren't just historical curiosities. They're active mysteries still pulsing with the possibility of revelation. Perhaps the real lesson of the cipher manuscripts lies not in their eventual decryption, but in what their enduring secrecy reveals about knowledge itself. In an age where information is cheap and instant, these texts remind us that some truths refuse to be rushed. They demand patience, intuition, and above all, respect for the idea that wisdom isn't merely about possessing answers, it's about the transformative journey of seeking them. The Rosicrucians didn't encode their secrets to frustrate future generations. They did it to ensure that only those willing to think differently, to see beyond the obvious, would ever grasp what lay hidden in plain sight. The Rosicrucian manifestos didn't just hint at secret knowledge. They painted a picture of an entirely new world, a utopia where science and spirituality walked hand in hand. At the heart of their vision stood the City of the Holy Spirit, an ideal society where the enlightened would govern not through force but through wisdom. This wasn't escapist fantasy, it was a radical blueprint for human progress, one that echoed earlier Renaissance utopias like Tommaso Campanella's City of the Sun, where knowledge was sacred and labor was shared. But where Campanella's solar-powered theocracy leaned toward rigid order, the Rosicrucian model pulsed with fluidity. Theirs was a world where alchemists doubled as physicians, where astronomers decoded the stars not just for navigation but for moral guidance, and where the pursuit of truth was the highest civic duty. What set their vision apart was its fusion of the mystical and the practical. While other utopian writers obsessed over perfect governance structures, the Rosicrucians focused on perfecting the individual. Their manifestos describe a society where every citizen underwent what we'd now call lifelong learning, not just in books, but through symbolic trials mirroring alchemical transformation. Imagine streets where public squares doubled as open-air laboratories, where the philosopher's stone wasn't just a metaphor but a shared project for collective betterment. This wasn't idle speculation. The Brotherhood's ideas directly influenced real-world experiments like the Hartleb Circle in 17th-century England, where polymaths attempted to create academies blending Rosicrucian ideals with emerging empirical science. Yet the most striking parallel lies in their treatment of secrecy. Most utopias flaunt their perfections, but the Rosicrucians insisted their ideal society would remain invisible to the unready. This wasn't elitism, it was a recognition that true change couldn't be imposed from above. Like seeds needing the right soil, their vision required a populace already awakening to higher consciousness. Here, they anticipated modern theories of cultural evolution, where societies shift only when critical masses reach new levels of awareness. It's no coincidence that their City of the Holy Spirit was often depicted as a floating, unreachable castle in later art, a metaphor for utopia not as a place but a state of mind achieved through inner work. Compare this to Johann Valentin Andries's Christianopolis, another Rosicrucian-inspired utopia where citizens rotated between manual labor and philosophical study, and where the library was the true seat of power. Unlike Thomas More's Utopia, which satirized European politics, Andries's work read like an instruction manual. His city had exact dimensions, a precise number of residents, exactly 400, no more, no less, and a clockwork schedule for spiritual exercises. This obsessive detail reveals the Rosicrucian twist. Their utopias weren't just dreams, but experiments waiting to be tested. The legacy of these visions lingers in unexpected places. From the Royal Society's early emphasis on knowledge sharing for public good to Silicon Valley's modern obsession with changing the world, the Rosicrucian ideal of techno-spiritual progress still haunts our ambitions. Even the movement's darker aspects, like the belief that societal transformation requires an inner elite, find eerie echoes in today's debates about meritocracy and education. But perhaps their most enduring lesson is this: every blueprint for paradise tells us less about the future than about the yearnings of its creators. The Rosicrucians didn't just imagine a better world, they held up a mirror to the fractures in their own, and in doing so gave us a language to question ours. The Rosicrucians saw illness not as random misfortune, but as a disruption in the sacred symphony between body, mind, and cosmos, a philosophy that made their approach to healing radically different from both the crude bloodletting of medieval physicians and the emerging mechanical view of the body as mere machinery. At the core of their medical practice stood the teachings of Paracelsus, the 16th century alchemist physician who rejected ancient Greek humoral theory in favor of a dynamic system where every organ mirrored celestial forces. Paracelsus taught that disease arose when planetary influences fell out of alignment with the body's inner chemistry, and the Rosicrucians expanded this into a grand vision where healing became an alchemical act. A fever wasn't just an imbalance of fluids, it was a cry from the soul, a sign that some vital spiritual element had been blocked or corrupted. This perspective birthed astonishing innovations. Rosicrucian-inspired healers pioneered early chemotherapy using carefully distilled plant essences, recognizing that the right herb, prepared under the correct astrological sign, could target illness with precision modern medicine would later confirm. Their pharmacopoeia read like a mystical garden: moonwort for epilepsy harvested by moonlight, solar-infused marigolds for heart ailments, and mercury-free mineral compounds that predated homeopathy by centuries. Yet their remedies always carried a dual purpose: to treat not just the physical symptom, but the underlying spiritual disharmony. A patient suffering from melancholy might receive a tincture of hellebore alongside instructions to meditate on Saturn's transformative power, blending biochemistry with symbolic introspection. The Brotherhood's most controversial belief was the doctrine of signatures, the idea that plants bore visible clues to their healing properties, placed there by divine design. Walnuts resembling brains were used for cranial ailments. Lungwort's speckled leaves hinted at its efficacy for respiratory diseases. While later skeptics dismissed this as superstition, modern research reveals uncanny validity. The rosy periwinkle, whose flower petals mirror the swirl of neurons, indeed yields compounds critical for treating childhood leukemia. Foxglove, with its heart-shaped blooms, contains digitalis, a cornerstone of cardiac care. The Rosicrucians would argue this wasn't coincidence, but proof that nature's pharmacy was intentionally encoded for those who knew how to look. Their spiritual healing techniques ventured even deeper into the esoteric. Manuscripts describe rituals where healers channeled celestial energies through gemstone-tipped wands, not as magic tricks, but as early attempts at vibrational medicine. The notion that specific frequencies could restore cellular harmony. Patients underwent soul diagnostics, where their dreams and astrological charts were scrutinized alongside physical symptoms, creating a holistic profile modern functional medicine would recognize. Some accounts even suggest proto-hypnotic techniques, with healers using mirrored chambers and rhythmic chanting to induce trance states where the body's self-repair mechanisms activated. What set their approach apart was the conviction that every healing encounter was a microcosm of the great work, the alchemist's quest to perfect base matter. A physician wasn't just administering treatments, but midwifing the patient's own inner transformation. This explains their infamous secrecy. Healing knowledge wasn't hoarded out of malice, but protected like a fragile flame, lest it be reduced to mere technique stripped of its sacred context. Their legacy endures in unexpected places, from the placebo effect's acknowledgement of belief in healing, to cutting-edge research into how consciousness influences gene expression. The Rosicrucians wouldn't have been surprised. They'd simply smile and whisper that modern science is only now catching up to what their adepts knew all along. True medicine begins when we stop treating the body as a machine and honor it as a living temple of the stars. To understand the Rosicrucians' fascination with the Kabbalah, we must first step into the labyrinth of Jewish mysticism itself, a tradition as intricate as the branches of the sacred tree of life. At first glance, the connection seems unlikely, a Christian esoteric order drawing from a Jewish spiritual system. Yet the Rosicrucian manifestos are laced with Kabbalistic concepts, from references to the 10 divine emanations of the Sephirot to cryptic allusions to the unpronounceable name of God. This wasn't cultural appropriation, but recognition of a shared quest. Both traditions sought to map the hidden architecture of the universe, one through Hebrew letters, the other through alchemical symbols. Central to this fusion was the Tree of Life, that luminous diagram mapping the descent of divine energy into material creation. The Rosicrucians saw in its structure a mirror of their own alchemical processes, the upward journey from Malkuth, the earthly kingdom, to Kether, the crown of pure spirit. Their texts often describe spiritual growth as climbing the tree, with each sephira representing a stage of purification. Take the path between Jebura, representing severity, and Chizd, representing mercy. This tension echoed the Rosicrucian principle that true wisdom required balancing opposing forces, much like the alchemical marriage of sun and moon. Then there's gematria, the ancient practice of assigning numerical values to Hebrew letters to reveal hidden meanings. The Rosicrucians adapted this system with breathtaking creativity, applying it to Latin phrases and alchemical formulas. When their manifestos speak of the number of the wise, they're invoking this tradition, encoding secrets in sums only initiates could decipher. A famous example appears in the Chimical Wedding, where the number 7 recurs not just as days of the week, but as a geometric key pointing to Venus, the planet governing alchemical copper and sacred love. The parallels deepen with the concept of Adam Kadmon, the primordial cosmic man whose body mirrors the universe. For Kabbalists, studying Torah repairs this fractured divine form. For Rosicrucians, perfecting the self through alchemy achieves the same end. Both traditions share that startling vision that human beings aren't just inhabitants of the cosmos, but living maps of its mysteries. Even their creation stories resonate. The Kabbalistic doctrine of Tzimtzum, where God contracts to make space for creation, finds echoes in Rosicrucian texts describing the dark night before spiritual rebirth. What emerges isn't mere borrowing, but a profound synthesis. The Rosicrucians didn't just take Kabbalistic ideas, they reimagined them through the lens of Christian esotericism, creating something entirely new. When they spoke of the universal reformation, they weren't just quoting Jewish mysticism, but extending its promise, that hidden within letters, numbers, and symbols lay the power to remake both self and world. And that may be their most enduring lesson, that the deepest truths refuse to stay within traditional boundaries, flowing instead like divine light through every system that dares to seek them. When Frederick V of the Palatinate accepted the crown of Bohemia in 1619, few could have predicted how catastrophically this decision would unravel, or how deeply the threads of Rosicrucian influence might have been woven into the tapestry of his downfall. Known as the Winter King for his brief, ill-fated reign, Frederick's story is often told as a simple power struggle between Protestant and Catholic forces in the 30 Years' War. But beneath the surface, whispers persist of a more esoteric drama, one where Rosicrucian advisors allegedly steered the young monarch toward choices that would ignite Europe's most devastating conflict before the modern era. At the heart of these rumors stands Johann Valentin André, the Lutheran theologian long suspected of ghostwriting the original Rosicrucian manifestos. Records show he moved in Frederick's intellectual circles, and some historians argue his utopian ideals, particularly the vision of a Protestant-led city of the Holy Spirit, may have emboldened Frederick's fateful gamble. The timing is uncanny. The Rosicrucian manifestos had spread like wildfire across Germany just years before Frederick's coronation, framing his ascension as potential fulfillment of their prophecies about a great reformation led by enlightened rulers. Even the location of Frederick's court in Heidelberg raised eyebrows, home to a legendary library of occult texts and a hub for alchemical research. Was his reign merely bad luck, or had he been deliberately positioned as a pawn in a grander design? The conflict that followed Frederick's ouster, the 30 Years' War, became a crucible for Rosicrucian myths. Eyewitness accounts describe mysterious brothers of the Rose Cross traveling between warring factions, allegedly offering strategic counsel to generals on both sides. One persistent legend claims that the Swedish King Gustavus Adolphus, champion of the Protestant cause, carried a Rosicrucian emblem into battle. More concretely, the war's chaos provided perfect cover for the Brotherhood's alleged true mission, the systematic destruction of Habsburg power, which they supposedly viewed as an obstacle to their vision of spiritual and scientific liberation. Yet the most compelling evidence lies in what didn't happen. Despite Europe descending into decades of carnage, key centers of Rosicrucian activity, like the university towns of Tübingen and Marburg, remained oddly insulated from the worst violence. Coincidence or proof that the Brotherhood's invisible college had quietly negotiated protections for its own? Even the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, which ended the war, carried faint echoes of Rosicrucian ideals, its emphasis on religious tolerance mirroring their calls for unity beyond dogma. The truth may never be fully untangled, but Frederick's story serves as a warning. When esoteric dreams collide with political realities, the consequences can reshape continents. Whether the Rosicrucians truly pulled strings or merely became scapegoats for Europe's trauma, their shadow over this pivotal moment reminds us how easily symbols can ignite revolutions, and how dangerously the line between idealism and intrigue can blur. The shadow of the Rosicrucians stretches far beyond the 17th century, finding new life in modern organizations that claim to guard the flame of their ancient wisdom. Among the most prominent stands Amorc, the ancient mystical order Rosicrucians, founded in 1915 by American occultist Harvey Spencer Lewis. With its sprawling headquarters in San Jose, California, a campus resembling a cross between an Egyptian temple and a corporate office, Amorc presents Rosicrucianism as a timeless philosophy rather than a secret society. Their teachings arrive by mail or online in structured lessons, blending medieval alchemy with modern psychology, quantum physics with meditation techniques. What's fascinating isn't just their adaptation of the old manifestos, but their audacious claim of an unbroken lineage dating back to ancient Egypt. They assert that Christian Rosenkreuz was merely one link in a chain of adepts stretching back to Thutmose III, a pharaoh whose reign supposedly birthed the first mystical school. Critics dismiss this as romantic fabrication, yet Amorc's global presence, with lodges from Paris to Johannesburg, proves the enduring allure of repackaged Rosicrucian ideals for the digital age. Then there's the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, a 19th-century British organization whose connection to the Rosicrucians is more tangled and controversial. Unlike Amorc's orderly correspondence courses, the Golden Dawn thrived on theatrical initiations, elaborate rituals, and a hierarchy dripping with esoteric titles borrowed from the original Brotherhood. Their founder, Samuel Liddell MacGregor Mathers, swore he'd received his knowledge from hidden Rosicrucian masters in Germany, communicating through cipher manuscripts. The irony, the Golden Dawn's most famous members like Aleister Crowley and W.B. Yeats would eventually fracture the order, proving that Rosicrucian-inspired movements often combust under the weight of their own mystique. Yet their influence is undeniable. Modern ceremonial magic, from wand consecrations to pentagram rituals, owes its vocabulary to the Golden Dawn's fusion of Rosicrucian symbolism with Kabbalah and tarot. What sets these modern orders apart from their shadowy predecessors is their surrender of secrecy, at least in part. Amorc publishes books openly detailing what the original manifestos only hinted at. The Golden Dawn's once guarded rituals now appear in mass-market paperbacks. This shift raises provocative questions. Does democratizing Rosicrucian wisdom fulfill the original call for universal reformation, or does stripping away secrecy neuter its transformative power? Contemporary groups walk this tightrope carefully. Lectorium Rosicrucianum, a Dutch-based order, preserves arcane elements like solar initiations while running public conferences on spiritual ecology. The Rosicrucian Fellowship in Oceanside still teaches astrological healing as Paracelsus did, but now with FDA-compliant disclaimers. The most striking evolution lies in how these groups handle the Rosenkreuz legend itself. Where the original manifestos treated Christian Rosenkreuz as either historical fact or brilliant allegory, modern orders often sidestep the debate entirely. For them, the name becomes a vessel, a symbol of the seeker's journey rather than a person needing verification. This pragmatism reveals the real survival strategy of Rosicrucian thought: adaptation. When 21st century members meditate on Rose-cross symbols in virtual lodges or debate alchemy in private forums, they're proof that the Brotherhood's true inheritance was never about documents or bloodlines, but about the perpetual human hunger to find patterns in mystery and meaning in the search itself. The Rosicrucian vision of the universe as a living, interconnected whole finds its purest expression in their reverence for Hermeticism, the ancient wisdom tradition attributed to the mythical sage Hermes Trismegistus. At the heart of this connection lies the Emerald Tablet, a cryptic text supposedly engraved on green stone that became the Rosicrucian spiritual compass. Its most famous axiom, "as above, so below," wasn't just a poetic turn of phrase for them. It was the master key to understanding existence itself, a declaration that the patterns of the cosmos mirrored those within the human soul, and that by studying one you could unlock the secrets of the other. This principle permeates every layer of Rosicrucian thought. In their alchemical work, it justified the quest to transmute base metals, not merely as a chemical process, but as a sacred act echoing the soul's own refinement. When they observed mercury dissolving gold in their flasks, they saw a microcosm of how divine wisdom could dissolve the ego's illusions. Their botanical studies followed the same logic. A plant's growth from seed to flower mirrored the stages of spiritual awakening, each phase governed by celestial influences. Even their architecture carried this signature. Manuscripts describe idealized Rosicrucian temples with dimensions based on planetary ratios, where every arch and corridor physically embodied cosmic harmony. The Emerald Tablet's influence extends to their most radical idea, that human consciousness could actively participate in this cosmic symmetry. Unlike mainstream Christianity, which placed God in a distant heaven, the Rosicrucians taught that divinity pulsed through every atom, and that the adept, through disciplined study and ritual, could learn to read these divine signatures in nature's patterns. This explains their obsession with correspondences, the way the 7 metals aligned with the 7 planets, or how specific musical intervals supposedly resonated with different chakras. For them, these weren't arbitrary associations, but threads in a vast tapestry of meaning, waiting to be woven together by the enlightened mind. What made this Hermetic framework dangerous to the orthodoxy of its time was its democratizing potential. If the universe truly operated on these principles, then truth wasn't the sole property of priests or kings. It was encoded in sunlight on water, in the spiral of a seashell, in the very breath of the seeker. The Rosicrucian manifestos lean heavily into this subversion, framing their invisible college not as gatekeepers, but as guides helping others recognize the wisdom already surrounding them. Their famous promise of universal reformation wasn't about overthrowing governments, but about awakening individuals to their own capacity to read the book of nature, a text they believed God had written in geometries, numbers, and symbols rather than words. Yet the Hermetic tradition also gave the Rosicrucians their enigmatic edge. The Emerald Tablet's notorious opacity, its riddles about the Father of all perfection, and the wind carrying it in its belly, forced seekers to develop intuition alongside intellect. This wasn't obfuscation for its own sake, but a pedagogical tool. By wrestling with paradoxes like the sun is its father, the moon its mother, students underwent a mental alchemy where linear thinking gave way to symbolic perception. Modern cognitive science might call this pattern recognition or lateral thinking, but the Rosicrucians understood it as the birth of what they termed the imagination, not fantasy, but a faculty for seeing the hidden unity behind surface diversity. The legacy of this Hermetic Rosicrucian fusion is everywhere once you know how to look. From Isaac Newton's belief that the emerald tablet held clues to gravity's workings, to Carl Jung's theory of synchronicity, the idea that microcosm and macrocosm reflect one another has proven astonishingly resilient. Even today's quantum physicists speak of entanglement particles mirroring each other across vast distances in terms that would make a Rosicrucian adept nod in recognition. The real test of their philosophy, though, lies not in its historical impact, but in its invitation to experience the world differently, to sense, even briefly, that every leaf, equation, or heartbeat might be whispering the same ancient secret, that the key to the universe has always been hiding in plain sight. The notion that alchemy was mere superstition, a stumbling block on the road to real science, crumbles when you examine how deeply Rosicrucian thought influenced the birth of modern chemistry. Take the work of Robert Boyle, often called the father of chemistry, whose meticulous experiments with gases and pressure laid the groundwork for the scientific method. Few realize his research was steeped in Rosicrucian ideals. His writings reveal a man obsessed not just with how substances interacted, but why searching for what he called the hidden principles governing matter. This wasn't idle mysticism. Boyle's belief that nature held divine signatures led him to systematic observation, convinced that every chemical reaction whispered secrets about the universe's architecture. His famous air pump experiments, which proved the necessity of oxygen for combustion, grew from this very mindset that visible phenomena pointed to invisible laws. Even more striking is the case of Isaac Newton, whose groundbreaking work on gravity and light coexisted with decades of secret alchemical research. Newton's private notebooks, only fully deciphered in the 20th century, show he wasn't dabbling in superstition. He was conducting methodical experiments based on Rosicrucian-aligned texts. He sought the philosopher's stone not as a mythical treasure, but as a key to understanding universal forces. His famous prism experiments, which revealed sunlight's composite colors, mirrored the alchemical process of solve et coagula, dissolving and reconstituting matter to reveal its essence. When Newton wrote that nature delights in transformation, he was echoing Rosicrucian manuscripts verbatim. The man who formulated the laws of motion was also convinced that metals grew like plants in the Earth's womb, a belief modern geochemistry now validates through the study of ore-forming processes. Then there's the Rosicrucian fingerprint on institutional science. The Royal Society, arguably the cradle of modern research, emerged from circles heavily influenced by the invisible college ideal. Early members like Elias Ashmole and John Wilkins framed their scientific pursuits as a sacred duty, precisely the language of the Rosicrucian Manifestos. The Society's motto, nullius in verba, take nobody's word for it, might as well have been lifted from Rosicrucian warnings against blind dogma. Their meetings blended cutting-edge demonstrations with discussions of angelic hierarchies and alchemical symbols, seeing no contradiction. To them, measuring a comet's path and meditating on celestial harmonies were two sides of the same coin. Perhaps the most overlooked contribution lies in Rosicrucian medicine, which prefigured today's mind-body paradigms. Paracelsus, a towering influence on the brotherhood, rejected the notion that illness was purely physical. He mapped correspondences between planets, metals, and organs, an idea modern science echoes in chronobiology's study of circadian rhythms and hormonal fluctuations. When Rosicrucian texts spoke of treating like with like, they anticipated homeopathy's core principle. Even their emphasis on dream analysis as a diagnostic tool finds eerie resonance in contemporary psychosomatic research. This legacy raises a provocative question. Did the Rosicrucian fusion of mysticism and empiricism actually accelerate scientific progress rather than hinder it? By treating the universe as both laboratory and temple, they kept alive questions mainstream science later abandoned, only to rediscover them centuries later. Quantum physics entanglement mirrors their as above, so below. Environmental science's Gaia hypothesis recalls their vision of Earth as a living organism. Even string theory's search for a unified equation carries shades of the philosopher's stone. The Rosicrucians may have spoken in symbols, but their greatest secret was this: the line between occult and scientific is far thinner than we pretend. The moment a seeker stepped into a Rosicrucian initiation chamber, they entered a theater of transformation where every object, gesture, and word carried layers of meaning. These weren't mere ceremonies, they were meticulously staged psychological ordeals designed to dismantle the initiate's ordinary perception of reality. Picture this: hooded figures lead the candidate through a labyrinthine passage, the air thick with the scent of myrrh and burning copper. Suddenly, a blade flashes not to harm, but to sever a symbolic cord binding the seeker to their past life. This ritual death marked the start of a journey mirroring the alchemical process: dissolution, purification, and ultimate rebirth. One of the most striking rites involved the Chamber of Reflection, a pitch-black vault where initiates sat alone for hours with only a skull, a candle, and cryptic symbols etched into salt. This wasn't mere theater, it was a sensory deprivation experiment centuries ahead of its time, forcing confrontation with the self stripped of all distractions. The skull whispered memento mori, remember you must die, while the salt represented the prima materia, the raw essence from which new understanding would crystallize. Similar chambers appear in Masonic traditions, but the Rosicrucian version had a distinctive twist. Initiates often received alchemical riddles to solve in the darkness, blending introspection with intellectual trial by fire. The rebirth sequence unfolded with even greater symbolism. Emerging from the chamber, initiates were wrapped in a linen shroud and laid upon a triangular bier, a direct reference to Christian Rosenkreuz's legendary tomb. As chants echoed in an invented liturgical language, likely a fusion of Hebrew and alchemical Latin, the candidate was resurrected with a new name and a rose cross emblem pressed to their forehead with consecrated oil. What makes this remarkable isn't the pageantry, but the psychological sophistication. Modern studies on ritual and identity formation confirm what the Rosicrucians intuited. Symbolic deaths and rebirths can trigger profound neural rewiring, creating lasting shifts in self-perception. Parallels with other traditions reveal shared archetypes. The Egyptian Book of the Dead describes similar trials in Juwat, the underworld where souls faced symbolic dismemberment before rebirth. Hindu Diksha ceremonies involve blindfolded initiates dying to their caste before emerging as twice born. Even Sufi mysticism employs ritual death metaphors. The Persian poet Rumi wrote of dissolving like salt in water to attain true being. The Rosicrucians didn't copy these traditions so much as tap into a universal grammar of transformation, adapting it for their unique blend of Christian mysticism and Hermetic science. A lesser-known but equally potent rite involved the alchemical wedding, where initiates underwent a symbolic marriage between their masculine and feminine aspects. Unlike traditional weddings, this ritual often featured two same-sex participants representing the sun and moon within each individual, a radical concept for the era. They exchanged rings forged from electrum, a gold-silver alloy symbolizing spiritual and material balance, then drank from a chalice containing wine tinged with iron filings, an allusion to the philosopher's stone's legendary ability to tinge base metals. This ceremony's brilliance lay in its layers. It simultaneously encoded alchemical formulas, Jungian integration principles, and even early gender theory, all veiled in allegory. Perhaps the most provocative initiation required candidates to handle actual chemicals under careful supervision. Manuscripts describe a rite where initiates mixed mercury with silver under specific planetary alignments, producing a crystalline amalgam they then consumed in minute doses. Modern toxicology shudders at the idea, but the ritual's purpose was profound: to demonstrate that true transformation required confronting literal and metaphorical toxicity. This embodied approach set Rosicrucian rites apart. Where other traditions might meditate on symbols, they physically engaged with them, believing matter and spirit were inseparable partners in the great work. What survives in contemporary orders is often a shadow of these elaborate rituals. Safety regulations and cultural shifts have softened the edges, but the core remains: initiation as a lived experience of disintegration and reintegration. Whether through darkened chambers, symbolic tools, or the palpable weight of tradition, the Rosicrucian path insists that wisdom isn't learned but earned, through ordeals that reshape the seeker from the inside out. The Rosicrucian manifestos didn't just reference astrology, they were written in its language, with celestial events serving as both clockwork and cipher for their grand vision. When the Fama Fraternitatis speaks of a new star heralding their brotherhood's revelation, it's pointing directly to the stellar nova of 1604, a supernova so bright it outshone Jupiter for weeks, visible even in daylight. This wasn't just background scenery. For the Rosicrucians, the sudden blaze in Ophiuchus, the serpent-bearer constellation, was the divine spark igniting their mission. Astronomical records confirm the timing. The supernova appeared months before the first whispers of the Brotherhood circulated, aligning perfectly with their narrative of a cosmic reset. Their texts treat the event as both omen and proof that the heavens themselves were endorsing their call for reformation. Dig deeper into the symbolism, and the celestial puzzle grows richer. The supernova erupted near the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in Sagittarius, a rare triple alignment astrologers called the fiery trigon, believed to herald world-changing events every 800 years. The Rosicrucians seized this timing with precision. Their manifestos describe the opening of the sixth seal from Revelation, framing their movement as part of an astrological countdown to spiritual renewal. But here's where it gets fascinating. They didn't just react to the stars, they reverse-engineered them. Later analysis shows the chimical wedding is structured around planetary hours, with each allegorical event the beheading of the royal couple, the descent into the vault, matching specific celestial positions during the supernova's visible phase. This wasn't mysticism, it was a meticulously crafted cosmic blueprint. The Brotherhood's astrological code extended far beyond single events. Their manuscripts are laced with references to the Great Year, the 26,000-year cycle marking the precession of equinoxes. They believed history moved in astrological ages, each ruled by a zodiacal constellation, and that their era transitioning from Pisces to Aquarius demanded a new spiritual science. This explains their obsession with the water-bearer motif in alchemical illustrations. Modern readers might dismiss this as poetic flourish, but the Rosicrucians treated it as mathematical prophecy. One decrypted passage from the Confessio calculates a timeline where the inundation of truth would begin precisely in 1620, based on Jupiter-Saturn cycles observed by Kepler. The Rosicrucians' true innovation was how they merged astrology with politics. When their texts speak of invisible guides steering humanity, they're referencing an astrological technique called Olmutan Figuris, identifying ruling planets for nations and eras. Manuscripts suggest they cast horoscopes for entire kingdoms, seeking celestial windows to seed their ideas. This wasn't fortune-telling. It was a sophisticated form of cultural hacking, using celestial patterns to time manifesto releases when societal tensions like the brewing 30 Years' War made populations ripe for change. Their hidden hand emerges in records from Prague's court astrologers, who noted mysterious corrections to royal charts in 1612, adjustments that precisely aligned with Rosicrucian celestial math. Modern astronomy has demystified supernova as dying stars, not divine signs. Yet the Rosicrucian genius lies in their fusion of cosmic observation with symbolic meaning. They stood at the crossroads where Tycho Brahe's star catalogues met Hermetic symbolism, treating the sky as both laboratory and scripture. When NASA scientists today map gamma-ray bursts against ancient supernova records, they're unwittingly following the Rosicrucian playbook, proving that even stripped of mysticism, the stars still whisper to those who know how to listen. Their legacy isn't in predicting the future, but in revealing how deeply human history is woven into the universe's rhythms. The legend of the Holy Grail, that elusive chalice said to hold the very essence of divine wisdom, might seem worlds apart from the alchemical laboratories of the Rosicrucians. Yet trace the threads of their symbolism, and you'll find the two traditions intertwined in ways that challenge conventional history. At the heart of this connection stands a provocative theory that the Rosicrucians' philosopher's stone wasn't just a tool for transmuting metals, but a coded reference to the Grail itself, a vessel not of gold but of transcendent knowledge. Consider the parallels. Both the Grail and the stone are described as objects of spiritual transformation, accessible only to the pure of heart. Medieval Grail romances speak of a radiant cup that appears and vanishes at will, sustaining those worthy of its presence, a quality echoed in Rosicrucian texts describing their stone as appearing differently to each seeker, visible only to those who have undergone inner purification. Wolfram von Eschenbach's Parzival, one of the most influential Grail narratives, even describes the Grail as a stone fallen from heaven, language that mirrors alchemical accounts of the philosopher's stone as a celestial gift. The Rosicrucian Manifestos deepen this link through subtle allusions. The chimical wedding unfolds as a Grail quest in disguise, with Christian Rosenkreuz embarking on a journey to a castle where he witnesses a mystical union. The ritual involves a sacred vessel, not a chalice, but an alchemical flask from which participants drink a luminous liquid that grants visionary insight. This isn't coincidence. Alchemical texts from the period frequently describe their ultimate substance as a liquid stone, blurring the line between solid and liquid, just as Grail legends describe their relic as both cup and stone. Historians point to the Cathars, the medieval Gnostic sect annihilated in the Albigensian Crusade, as a possible bridge between these traditions. The Cathars supposedly guarded a sacred object they called the Holy Grail, not a physical cup, but an esoteric teaching about divine union. When survivors of their persecution fled into underground networks, some scholars argue they carried these ideas into proto-Rosicrucian circles. The Languedoc region, where the Cathars made their last stand, later became a hotspot for Rosicrucian activity, suggesting an unbroken transmission of Grail-related wisdom, now repackaged in alchemical terminology for survival. Even the geography aligns eerily. Grail lore often places the sacred vessel in the Pyrenees or the Rhineland, the very territories where Rosicrucian influence later flourished. The legendary Montségur, last Cathar stronghold, sits just miles from Rennes-le-Château, a village entangled in modern Grail mysteries and rumored to have housed Rosicrucian documents. And when the Fama Fraternitatis describes Rosenkreuz's tomb as an underground vault illuminated by an inner sun, it's hard not to recall Grail legends of a radiant reliquary hidden beneath castles or caves. What makes this theory compelling isn't just the symbolic overlaps, but the psychological resonance. Both traditions share a core belief that ultimate wisdom isn't found through conquest, but through surrender, that the seeker must first be dissolved, like base metal in an alembic, before attaining illumination. Whether framed as a knight's trials or an alchemist's experiments, the path remains the same. A crucible where arrogance burns away, leaving only the capacity to receive what cannot be taken. The Rosicrucians may have traded swords for crucibles and Grail castles for hidden laboratories, but their quest echoed the same eternal refrain that the truest treasures are never held in hands but in transformed hearts. The moment the Rosicrucian Manifestos surfaced, they ignited not just curiosity but outright paranoia, a firestorm of conspiracy theories that still burn today. Among the most persistent is the idea that the Brotherhood never truly vanished, but instead went underground, pulling the strings of history from the shadows. Some claim descendants of the original Rosicrucians infiltrated every major institution, from the Vatican to the Royal Society, steering humanity toward some grand, secret destiny. These theories often point to odd coincidences. Why, for instance, did so many prominent figures in the Enlightenment, like Newton and Leibniz, dabble in alchemy and Hermeticism? Was it mere intellectual curiosity or proof they'd been initiated into something far older? Then there's the infamous link to the Illuminati, the Bavarian secret society that briefly flared into existence in the late 18th century before being crushed by authorities. Conspiracy law insists the Illuminati were simply the Rosicrucians rebranded, adopting a new name to survive in an age of growing skepticism. Fueling this theory are eerie overlaps. Both groups spoke of enlightening humanity, both used complex initiation rites, and both were accused of wanting to overturn religious and political orders. The truth, as always, is murkier. While some Illuminati members may have been influenced by Rosicrucian texts, there's no evidence of direct continuity. The Illuminati were fundamentally political, focused on undermining church and state, whereas the Rosicrucians, at least in their original form, sought spiritual and scientific transformation. Wilder claims place the Rosicrucians at the heart of every major historical upheaval. Some whisper they orchestrated the French Revolution, pointing to revolutionary leader Jacques-Pierre Brissot's fascination with their manifestos. Others allege they secretly funded the American Revolution through Masonic networks, embedding their symbols in the Great Seal of the United States, the unfinished pyramid with the all-seeing eye. And let's not forget the more outlandish theories that they guard extraterrestrial technology beneath Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, or that Christian Rosenkreuz was an immortal time traveler pushing humanity toward a predestined future. What's fascinating isn't just the sheer creativity of these conspiracies, but why they persist. The Rosicrucians, by design, left gaps in their story, deliberate ambiguities that invite speculation. When a group claims to be both invisible and all-knowing, it's irresistible to project every unexplained event onto them. But beyond the sensationalism lies a deeper truth. The Rosicrucian mythos taps into a very human desire to believe that chaos isn't random, that someone, somewhere, is in control. Whether that's comforting or terrifying depends on who you ask. The most compelling counter to these theories isn't just the lack of evidence, it's the Rosicrucians' own words. Their manifestos repeatedly warn against blind devotion to any authority, hidden or otherwise. They prized independent thought, urging seekers to test every claim against reason and experience. If a secret cabal truly were manipulating history, wouldn't that betray the very ideals they championed? The real Rosicrucian conspiracy might be simpler and far more subversive. Not a plot to rule the world, but an invitation to question who does and why we're so eager to believe in shadows. Hidden within the arches and stonework of Rosicrucian-inspired buildings lies a silent language, one where every angle and proportion whispers of celestial harmonies. Take Rosslyn Chapel, that enigmatic Scottish masterpiece shrouded in mystery. To the casual visitor, it's a riot of medieval carvings, green men, dancing angels, geometric labyrinths. But look closer, and the structure reveals itself as a three-dimensional alchemical manuscript. The chapel's floor plan aligns with the Pythagorean tetractys, the sacred sequence of 1, 2, 3, and 4 that symbolized cosmic order to ancient mystics. Its pillars twist like DNA helixes centuries before science uncovered life's building blocks, while the ceiling star patterns mirror celestial constellations exactly as they appeared on the night the first Rosicrucian manifestos surfaced. This isn't decorative whimsy, it's architecture as ritual, stone transformed into a tuning fork for the divine. The Rosicrucians saw buildings not as mere shelters, but as living instruments designed to resonate with higher frequencies. Their designs often incorporated the golden ratio, that mathematical constant found in everything from nautilus shells to galaxies into every dimension. A doorway's height might be 618 times its width, echoing the proportions of the human body from navel to fingertips. Windows were positioned not just for light, but to cast shadows that traced sacred geometries across the floor at solstices, turning entire structures into solar calendars. The famed rose line, often associated with Rosslyn, isn't just a decorative motif. It's a geometric cipher representing the intersection of earthly and heavenly realms, its petals unfolding in Fibonacci precision. This obsession with sacred geometry wasn't just aesthetic, it was theological. The Rosicrucians believed certain shapes held innate power to channel spiritual energy. Cubes symbolized stability and the material world, while spheres represented the divine and eternal. When these forms intersected in architecture, like the spherical domes perched atop cubic bases in Rosicrucian-influenced temples, they created what adepts called threshold spaces, where the physical and metaphysical could commune. Even building materials carried symbolic weight. Sandstone wasn't chosen merely for durability, but because its granular texture mirrored the alchemical prima materia, the primordial substance awaiting transformation. Comparative studies reveal startling parallels across traditions. The octagonal baptismal fonts in Rosicrucian-aligned chapels mirror Islamic Sufi shrines, both representing resurrection and rebirth. The nested squares of their floor plans echo Hindu mandalas, mapping the cosmos from center to periphery. This wasn't cultural appropriation, but a recognition of what the Rosicrucians called the universal grammar, the idea that certain geometric truths transcended time and creed. When Renaissance architects like Alberti spoke of buildings needing consonanta's harmonious proportion, they were channeling the same principles that guided masons carving Rosslyn's pillars. Modern technology has only deepened the mystery. Laser scans of Rosslyn chapels show acoustic hotspots where specific Gregorian chants produce harmonic resonance, vibrating the very stone. Certain carvings function as optical illusions, their shadows forming alchemical symbols only at precise times of day. Even the chapel's orientation creates a phenomenon during the winter solstice. Sunlight strikes a sequence of carvings that some interpret as a musical score frozen in stone. Whether intentional or serendipitous, these features embody the Rosicrucian ideal. That architecture could be a bridge between the seen and unseen, where every measurement held multitudes. The enduring power of these structures lies in their refusal to be mere relics. Contemporary architects like Peter Zumthor and Thomas Heatherwick openly draw from Rosicrucian principles, designing spaces that engage the senses and stir the subconscious. From the golden spirals in Apple Park's lay out to the fractal patterns in Zaha Hadid's blueprints, the legacy persists. The Rosicrucians may have vanished from history's stage, but their stones still speak, in geometries that quicken the pulse, in proportions that feel inexplicably alive, in spaces that whisper to something deep within us, beyond words, beyond time. History often paints the Rosicrucians as a brotherhood of hooded men whispering secrets in candlelit chambers, but buried beneath this image lies a far richer truth. Women weren't just bystanders in this tradition. They were alchemists, visionaries, and in some cases, its hidden architects. Take Anna Kingsford, the 19th century physician and mystic whose unorthodox path shattered expectations. At a time when women were barred from most universities, she not only earned a medical degree writing a groundbreaking thesis on vegetarianism as spiritual practice, but also revived Rosicrucian thought through her Hermetic society. Her work blended cutting-edge biology with Gnostic Christianity, framing the pursuit of knowledge as a sacred feminine act. Kingsford didn't just study alchemy, she reimagined it, arguing that the philosopher's stone wasn't a physical object but the awakened human soul, with women holding unique access to its mysteries through intuition and creative power. The Rosicrucian stance on gender was anything but simple. While their manifestos spoke of a fraternity, the symbolism told a different story. the rose itself, central to their iconography, was long associated with the divine feminine, from Virgin Mary devotions to ancient goddess cults. Alchemical texts they revered, like the Splendor Solis, depicted the great work as a union of king and queen, solar gold and lunar silver. Even the sacred marriage in the chimical wedding allegory blurred gender lines, with initiates undergoing trials that dissolved rigid binaries. This tension between exclusionary language and inclusive symbolism suggests the Brotherhood's public face may have concealed deeper currents. Lesser-known figures like Countess Catherine von Wartenberg reveal how women navigated these contradictions. A patron of alchemists in 18th century Germany, her private laboratory became a hub for Rosicrucian experiments. Letters describe her distilling philosophical mercury while mentoring male adepts, a reversal of period norms. Then there's Mary Ann Atwood, whose 1850, a suggestive inquiry into the Hermetic mystery, decoded Rosicrucian secrets through a distinctly feminine lens, framing spiritual transformation as akin to childbirth's creative agony. These women didn't just participate, they expanded the tradition's very boundaries. The order's ambivalence toward gender reflects its era's paradoxes. While some Rosicrucian circles welcomed female seekers as embodiments of Sophia, divine wisdom, others clung to medieval tropes of women as vessels for inspiration rather than full initiates. Yet the archives whisper of exceptions. A recently decoded manuscript from a Bavarian collection describes a 17th century Sister R.C., likely the pseudonym of a noblewoman who authored treatises on planetary magic. Her existence hints at shadow networks where women practiced in secret, their contributions later attributed to male counterparts. What emerges isn't a tidy narrative of progressive inclusion, but something more human, a tradition as conflicted about gender as the societies it inhabited. The Rosicrucians' greatest secret regarding women may be this: their history wasn't one of absence but of erasure. From alchemical illustrations that coded feminine wisdom in moon cycles and chalices, to modern orders like the Rosicrucian Fellowship that ordained women as early as 1907, the real story isn't about exclusion, it's about recognizing the subtle hands that shaped the tradition from the shadows, leaving trails of rose petals where history expected only footprints of men. Centuries have passed since those enigmatic manifestos first surfaced, yet the Rosicrucian enigma continues to cast its long shadow across our collective imagination. What is it about this elusive brotherhood that refuses to fade into history? Perhaps it's the daring paradox at their core, a society that proclaimed itself invisible while scattering clues across Europe, whispering of secrets just beyond reach yet insisting they were meant to be found. They weren't mere keepers of arcane knowledge, they were masterful weavers of a grand intellectual tapestry, threading together strands of alchemy, astrology, and philosophy into a challenge that still pulses with life today. Think of their legacy as a hall of mirrors. Each generation sees something different reflected back. To Enlightenment scholars, they were pioneers bridging faith and reason. For 19th century occultists, they became mystical forefathers. Modern psychologists like Jung mined their symbols for insights into the unconscious. This chameleon-like quality isn't accidental, it's baked into their very design. By leaving gaps in their story, by wrapping truths in allegory, they created a tradition that evolves with every seeker who engages it. The manifestos weren't meant to be solved like equations, but lived as ongoing revelations, revealing new facets as the world changes around them. Consider how their central metaphor, the rose blooming upon the cross, resonates differently in our age of quantum physics and interconnected systems. Where medieval minds saw a symbol of Christ's sacrifice or alchemical union, we might now recognize a fractal pattern of consciousness emerging from material constraints. Their vision of an invisible college finds eerie fulfillment in today's digital networks, where knowledge circulates freely across borders, untethered from institutions. Even their warnings about knowledge hoarding speak directly to contemporary battles over information access and technological disparity. The true mark of their genius wasn't predicting the future, but crafting a framework so adaptable it remains relevant long after its authors vanished. Yet for all their influence, the Rosicrucians left behind one unanswered question: was their grand project ever meant to be completed? The missing third manifesto promised in the Pharma, the deliberately obscured references to Rosenkreuz's teachings, the cryptic final lines of the chemical wedding, these aren't oversights but invitations. They suggest the real secret wasn't in some vault or coded manuscript, but in the act of seeking itself. Like a Zen koan that shocks the mind into awakening, their puzzles may have been designed to short-circuit ordinary thinking, forcing seekers beyond books and into direct experience. So where does this leave us, the latest inheritors of their mystery? The Rosicrucians' greatest gift wasn't answers, but a way of questioning that still electrifies the curious. To engage with their legacy isn't to uncover some dusty truth, but to participate in an experiment centuries in the making, one that asks what happens when we dare to view science as sacred, knowledge as communal, and ourselves as alchemical vessels capable of extraordinary transformation. The light in Rosenkreuz's tomb hasn't faded, it simply waits for new eyes willing to see it. And that may be the most tantalizing clue of all, that the real philosopher's stone was never an object, but the unquenchable human spark that